In the quiet moments before the world wakes up, there's a place where pain meets peace, where every breath feels like a prayer and grief stands still. We carry the weight of what was and search for meaning in the smallest things. And sometimes all it takes is one moment to remind us we're still here, still healing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. You guys know who it is. This is Tony Lynch. I'm the host of this podcast. And yes, we are your number one podcast to bring you stories around death, dying, and grief, all the messiness that comes in between, with some amazing people out here doing some amazing things, changing people's lives one heartbeat at a time. Now, before I bring on my next guest, I would like to say, if this is your first time tuning in, do me a favor. Head on over to the YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you'll be notified every time that we drop a new episode. And most importantly, maybe you know someone who can benefit from the conversation that we have. Do me a favor, share this along with them. And if you have any questions or comments, since this is a live stream, we'll be sure to answer those as we go. One other thing, this is for educational purposes only. Now, without further ado, guys, help me welcome my next guest to the show, Dr. Rita. Dr. Rita, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Tony. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. I'm here with you, about to have this amazing conversation. And, we're going to educate some people today. So, yeah, it's been amazing. So before we get started, go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience. Tell people who you are, where you're from, and about the work that you do.
Okay. So my name's Dr. Rita Louise. My day job is working as a medical intuitive counselor, and energy medicine practitioner. I am a naturopathic physician with a PhD in natural health counseling. I've written 7 books, tons of articles, have appeared on podcasts all over the place, have been on radio and TV stuff. I've done a lot of stuff.
Understood. Definitely understood. And I want to say thank you for your time today, and thank you for the work that you do. Such important work that you do out there. Now, if you could, let's talk a little bit more about your work and what does that entail when you're helping people.
So I have 2 basic kinds of clients that come to me. People that have hardcore medical issues, they're having, I don't want to say sleeping because sleep is not one of my areas, but they're having some kind of digestive disturbance, or they're not feeling well and they want to understand what's going on. Many times the people that come to me don't necessarily trust the mainstream medical profession and want some alternative viewpoint about what's going on, or they've gone the medical model and they're not satisfied with the answers that they're getting. The doctor's saying, hey, we're going to operate. And they're like, yeah, maybe there's something else I can do before I get to that point. So that's one whole group of people I work with. But I also work with a whole huge group of people that come to me for, and I'm going to say counseling. They're in a relationship that's toxic. They're making life decisions and they need some guidance and insight, because when you do intuitive work, it's like you can kind of see around the edges of things and access information that might not be readily available to their waking consciousness. And so you can kind of give them a broader picture or identify, well, yeah, I see this for you, but I'm also feeling like you have a lot of fear in making this move. And maybe we need to address the fear that you're hitting so that you can move forward in clarity. So I love what I do. I love it.
I love it. Now, let's talk about your journey. How did you get into doing this work?
So, all right, hang on. I want to make sure that my phone is on silent because sometimes I don't do that. So I'm actually going to start the story a little earlier. So growing up, we would get our allowance based on reading books. So not about doing chores, but about reading books. And so we had to read a book every 2 weeks to get our allowance. And I was not interested in Nancy Drew or fiction type books. I was always I had an overwhelming fascination with archaeology and anthropology, and kind of worked my way through the entire library books on archaeology and anthropology. And it was a bucket list moment when I discovered that the La Brea tar pit was actually in downtown Los Angeles. And I got to go there and like get tar. It was so cool. But then I got turned on to the whole concept of ESP, because intuition and psychic phenomena, that's what it was called back in the day, was ESP. And moved from the archaeology and anthropology section at the library to the paranormal area, which was right next to the witchcraft department, which I didn't, and it was this little section of books, and started reading those, and the interest never shifted, and so I spent the bulk of my life reading esoteric texts, Kabbalistic texts, books about the aura and the chakras and energy. When I was 30, I found the Berkeley Psychic Institute and studied with them, and discovered, much to my surprise, that I had been very psychic my whole life, but no one ever said, when you walk up to someone and just look at them and go, well, where were you yesterday? Having them check for a brain tumor because they weren't at work the day before. And that was where they were, was having them check for a brain tumor. Oops. Oops.
Sorry.
You kind of get in trouble for like knowing a secret that you weren't supposed to know, but it was just this very offhanded comment, but I'm good at those. But a lot of the things that happened in my life prior to that moment of connecting the dots validated all of this stuff that happened when I was younger, that, I just thought were weird coincidences and synchronicities, and, in starting to work with people, one of the things that I'm very gifted with is finding health concerns, because everybody has their channel, so people that talk to dead people, mediums, that's their thing. They talk to dead people. I don't talk to dead people. But it's because you're more open to receiving that vibration of information. And so for me, it's about health stuff. But people would go, well, what can I do about it? And I had nothing. I had absolutely nothing. And so I decided to go back to school, and I got my degree as a naturopath, which is a holistic physician that works with herbs and supplements and massage and chiropractic. Not that you're necessarily going to be a chiropractor, but you understand what it is so that you can make those recommendations. So anything that's non-invasive. And then decided to go ahead and get my PhD in natural health counseling. And here I am today.
Even better. Wow, man, that is truly amazing. Now let's talk about connecting the dots, right? Because there was when I first realized that this is what I wanted to do, grief work and podcasting and everything that came in between it, I heard a quote that said, you can't connect the dots on the inside. You have to literally step outside of the path and look at everything and see the direction that you've been going in, right? And I've been able to do that a couple of times because I was always curious about the direction that I was going in. Like, am I going in the right direction? Am I doing everything right? And, and then the aha moment came, was like, yeah, just keep staying on this, right? But it was a multitude of things that kind of stitched this stuff together. Like, the experience of loss and the healing that comes along with grief, and the challenges, everything that came along with it. Was it like that for you when you connected the dots and said, oh, this really makes sense to me? I can do this all the time.
Actually, no, because this has just been this progression of me just doing what I want, and not really. So, and so I'm just going to be real, so I really value, even though sometimes I'm not very good at it, listening to myself and honoring those aha moments, because I know that that's God or source or spirit or whatever communicating with me, and so over the years I've gotten much better at listening because, in my personal life, so my professional life looks great. It looks great. Like I got my act together. It's my personal life that there are a lot more bumps and bruises and challenges and stuff going on, and so where I've gotten the butt kick, the proverbial butt kick and 2x4 up the side of the head has always been in my personal life. Married 4 times, just, yeah. So, but what's interesting, so I'm sitting here, and this is what's been going on this past week. So with all this stuff that I've done, one of the things that I have come to find out, even though I kind of knew it, but now it is confirmed, is that Google devalues websites that talk about alternative health concepts. And so even though with, writing 7 books and, doing all of this work and writing all of these articles, it's like they say, you're not a medical doctor, so we're not going to trust who you are. We're not going to trust anything you say. So we're going to move you from wherever in the search rankings down. And so this week, I started really digging using AI because I figured they would sort of be honest about it-ish, about the whole thing and what I've come to discover. And I am kind of dealing with my own grief. So it's really interesting that we're here together, is the fact that I'm probably going to walk away from my business. I've been doing this work for 30 years. I've devoted so much time and energy into it, but it's kind of like beating my head against the wall, and it ain't working. And so it's like, okay, well, you have to be okay with that because obviously you're supposed to be doing something else. What that something else is, I have absolutely no clue. But, I know that things are provided for me in the time that I'm supposed to get it. And so the bigger part that I'm dealing with in this moment is being okay with letting go of something that has occupied my time and energy for years.
Now, it's sad that you may have to make that decision. Huh?
I said, now, isn't that an ass kick?
That is an ass kick. And it's sad that, that you've come to, gotten to this place to where you may have to make a decision to walk away from this work, right? Because in a lot of ways, looking at the last few years, from 2019 up until now, it seems like there's been an expansion in people getting into the field, but yet you do come at it from a different aspect. The work is still important, and it sucks that Google will devalue your website based upon the things that you teach, right? It's like they're not trying to give people the opportunity to have options to better their lives, right? It always seems like they're trying to funnel us back down into an old way of doing things because they think that it works. But but that's a conversation for another time. That's definitely a conversation for another time. So now you said that you've been dealing with your own grief and things like that. Do you mind to elaborate on that a little bit?
So, I mean, at this point, and I haven't really totally processed it. I ended up taking the last year and a half off because I bought this project house because business was not happening. And it was like, okay, well, I'm going to go do this because at least I can take my energy and invest it into this here. And it's going to be a rental, so I'll actually have money coming back because investing it into my business wasn't working. But I think the grief, and I'm just being really honest here, even with myself, is the feeling that I'm a failure, the feeling that I've done all of this stuff, but it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm not 100% walking away from this work because it's part of who I am and I love doing it. And you know what I mean? So there's always going to be some aspect to it. But it's going to become something different, you know, and there's just a lot of hurt. Hang on one second, because I've been doing this research, which is going to turn into some articles. But let me see if I can find this one. I have like 30 something pages of notes.
That's good stuff.
Well, it's interesting because you sit there and you start asking AI questions and it gives you, okay, some very biased answers, but okay, so this was one of the things that AI came back to me at, which is this week, actually the last 2 days. For someone like Dr. Rita Louise, who work often delves into areas that are not fully embraced by mainstream scientific consensus, e.g. medical intuition, energy medicine, metaphysics, getting good placement on Google. Okay, so Google controls 87% of all searches, 80 or 97%. So if you're not getting good location on Google, you're screwed. For her Your Money, Your Life content, it's incredibly difficult and arguably becomes an uphill battle against Google's core algorithmic philosophy. And so you read something like that, and it's just like, well, why don't you take a knife and just stab it into my freaking heart?
Right.
I mean, there were some other commentaries and some of the other ones that I pulled off that was just like, okay, so I'm not a medical doctor, but I'm a consummate researcher, you know, and I will deep dive into stuff. And to have someone that doesn't know me at all say your work is worthless is like, wow. And I know I'm not the only one. I mean, I'm the only one whining about it. And my plan right now is to put together a number of articles because I know I'm not the only one. Millions of alternative healthcare providers, people that made like supplements, you know, so if you made some kind of herbal combination for bladder infections, you got devalued. So you lost your business, you know, because you're not getting any traffic going to it. You know, and it's just like, how can you do that to people and then say it's not censorship?
Right.
You know, so there's also a certain amount of cognitive dissonance that I'm experiencing with this whole thing. It's like,
no, that totally I totally understand that, and I want to talk about that for a little bit because of the simple fact of it always seems as if medication is often pushed on people unnecessarily because they can't come up with a proper diagnosis, you know, and I probably get some flack because of that. Because I did look, there are some good doctors out there that believe in medicine to be a temporary thing, right? But when it comes down to people dealing with the deep emotional breakage in our heart that's called grief, there's no medication for it. And, you know, too many people look for quick fixes. As someone that does the work that you do, how do we give people alternatives to taking processed medications to help them?
well, you know, I think, you know, awareness that there is something, that there is an alternative. There is the willingness to try to do it. But in today's, you know, you sit there and you start coughing or you have an ache somewhere, and it's like, we all do this. We go online, we go on Google, and we look up our symptoms and try to diagnose ourselves. That's what we do. However, and I ended up writing an article on this topic. If you sit there and you look for something alternative, so let's say you think you do have a bladder infection, or you're pretty sure you have a bladder infection, and you want to find something natural to use and not take an antibiotic. All of that material is suppressed. Unless the Cleveland Clinic or PubMed, or somebody has said, oh, well, cranberry juice is good.
Mhm.
And, you know, so even if you wanted to do that, and this has been the last, I'm going to say 2 years, maybe 3 years, that there has been this giant shift that access to that information to make a different choice is not there. You know, or you really have to dig. You know, I tell people now, use AI because it kind of sorts through some of that, even though it does caveat with, like, you know, you need to go see your primary care physician, and these, you know, we're not making any recommendations and blah, 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 but they will provide you more information than if you just do a Google search on it.
Now, I want to talk about that a little bit because that seems to be the buzz nowadays, right? And I've had several discussions with people, and there's a fear that comes along with AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, trying to get people to see past the fear, but use AI as a tool to help you in your work, right? Because you have access, you know, I mean, milliseconds between information that you can get to be able to help better yourself. I think where people are becoming more afraid of is that people will become more dependent on AI, especially those who are deeply hurt um, and have pretty much given up on the human race. They're finding comfort in building a relationship with their AI, like
Mm-hmm.
ChatGPT, Gemini, all the, and a few of them out there as well. And so practitioners are going, you know, what can we do to work alongside of it, or either, you know, give people better alternatives for actual human connection. And you know, for me myself, I do see this as a challenge because a friend of mine, he's really into AI. And he told me he can personalize his AI to where his AI almost knows him better than he knows himself. So
That
what can we do as practitioners to use this as a very productive tool in growing?
You know, I haven't personally used AI to help me solve my emotional issues. So, you know, I use it more as a research tool. Um, you know, but AI is only going to sit there and scrub the web for information. And one of the things that I have seen is that each AI platform has a certain level of bias to it. You know, so like if I'm sitting here talking about a subject, you know, it's going to go through my filters and come out with a certain amount of bias that comes from me and my life experiences. And if you're talking on the same topic, there's going to be a certain level of bias that comes through you. And it's not that we intentionally do it, but there's a certain amount of filtering that happens. And I feel like with AI, there is filtering that happens. And, you know, it was interesting. I mean, this was so when I was sitting there looking up, and this is where some of my concern with AI comes from, where I was looking up in Google. Sorry, I'm on this whole Google thing today.
No worries. No worries at all.
You know, but I was asking about something, and I don't really remember what I was asking about. And I said, well, can you provide information that comes from dissenting individuals? Oh, it was about how uh, AI was suppressing alternative health websites. So that was the general topic. And they're like, oh, well, we're not censoring them. You know, we're and I'm like, okay, well, that's a little gaslighting there. But okay, I said, well, can you provide me articles of people that have a dissenting view and think that you know, that Google is controlling the narrative and have issues with how things have moved forward? And I got 5 articles. And I said, well, how come there's not really any literature? You know, like I know there has to be more voices than 5 voices. And I had a laugh. They said, oh, well, there probably are, but because they go against the mainstream narrative, they've been devalued. And so they're not going to show up in this search.
Wow. So there is a level of control that comes along with this. So it's not as free learning as what people think it is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because I've become I've been starting to use AI a lot more. Just trying to better understand how to use it in a way to where it can be beneficial for myself and those that I serve, right? Figuring out algorithms and things like that, figuring out, coming up with social media strategies and things like that, just to be better at what I do, or even confirm, that I'm on the right path and how my approach is. But there's so much that goes along with that. And it sucks because when you actually think about how they're manipulating AI, it goes into freedom of information, or your freedom of speech. Being censored in every direction to, like as you mentioned before, to fit a narrative. And one thing that really just pulls my bones is the fact of that is giving is censoring things that people need, especially when it comes down to people dealing with their emotions, and things like that, and not having that real authentic feel to it, right? It's like, oh, we're just going to come up with some basic blueprint book crap, and and hopefully you follow that, right? And I think that's where we as practitioners, we can sit in and kind of go, nothing's going to beat that human connection. Nothing's ever going to be able to take that part away. So,
And
but I've seen too many people give up.
we'll come back to that topic here in a second.
Okay.
It values clinical information as opposed to real information. So when I write, I write with a certain level of professionalism. How's that? With a certain level, but it's real, and it's my voice, and it's like, well, you could try that, but not necessarily feeling it, and so people can relate to it because it's like talking to a friend versus trying to extract from some medical treatise that you get nothing from. There's not that little tidbit insight going on. But I'm going to come back to your comment about giving up. There are more and more people that are using AI to create content for their sites. Although I did find in my investigation today, and I think I copied and pasted, so I'm praying it's in my notes, that Google will start to devalue people that use AI to create content, even though they push it, because they have so many rules. So if you're using AI to create content, then you don't have to think, and you don't have to do anything, because you just sit there and go, hey, write me a book that's 5,000, 50,000 words long, and here's the list of topics I want you to cover. Boom. And it just will do it for you. Or I just heard on the news yesterday that there's this band who has over 1 million views, likes, whatever, on Spotify. I think it's Spotify. It is completely AI generated band. Completely AI generated. And it made the top of the charts. It's like, so if you're a musician, if you're an artist, it's like, if I can go into AI and go, hey, make me a picture of my dog, and me hanging out, and it's free and it's easy because I can just sit in front of my computer and do that, then I'm not going to contact an artist to create art for me, or, sit there and want to pay a musician, or, support a musician who is creating, or the person who's writing that is creating. It just takes that away. or it makes it easier and less challenging to compete. Because if I can push a button and make some music and hit the top of the charts, then why bother? Why should I bother spending my energy doing something that's going to be hit or miss? Which is mind-boggling and so sad. And I could see this whole other layer of people that are creative individuals losing their livelihoods because of AI taking that place for them.
I see that a lot too. Definitely see that a lot, and I also see how that can be a problem. That can be a huge problem, right? Because the generation that we come from, we was taught to think outside the box, to be creative. I mean, we had music from Poison and White Snake. You know, we had Run DMC. We had all the original, a lot of the original people. You know, and not that the music out there is bad or anything like that, but I'm right there with you. It gives people an alternative to where they can just sit down, press a button, and go back to playing video games. Like there's no effort in it. There's no feeling behind it. So it kind of changes the dynamic of how we listen to things. But I also look at the times that we're in as well, which is the hardest part, especially coming from a place where I'm old school. You know, I'm an old school person. Like put in the work. You know, what I'm saying, put in your time and and let everything speak for itself. Don't be afraid to go out there and fail. Where I think where AI eliminates the possibility of failures, right? Because when you become dependent on it, it actually works with the algorithm, which helps you get out there a lot more. Now, I'm watching practitioners who are coming into the field these days, and most are giving up because they don't know how to compete, or they haven't figured out how to use AI in a way to scale their businesses and things like that, especially in the grief field. The grief field is one of those places where you have to honestly know what your niche is, and you have to know how to target them. You have to know how to build and things like that from it. And there's no blueprint for it. I mean, there's several people coming out that are trying to follow similar blueprints, but they're finding that they have to either take away some things from it and add things to it, and they just don't know what to add to it in order to get to that level, to where they can be sustained in this industry. But I think I see it all. I also see it happening across all industries as well. And
Yeah, it's scary times. I sit there and I just say, I'm glad I'm old. And I don't necessarily have to navigate this landscape because I could see, I want to say 10 years, but I don't even think it's going to be 10 years, 5 years, that it is going to be so different, just so different, and it's already scary now and it's hard to navigate. And you spend so much time just like trying to get butts in chairs that it's like you don't really have time to do your work.
right.
And I mean, I like writing. I never thought I could say that out loud, but I really do. Actually, I like researching. I love researching, but the writing just comes as a part of that. And sometimes I use Google a lot. I have books or whatever, and I'll read something. Someone will make some statement, and and it could be from a crappy article that was on page 13, but I just kind of dig and dig and dig. But they make this one comment that sets off this cascade in my mind of deeper understanding or deeper, insight. Did that make sense?
It does make sense.
And it's like, so, okay, so their little sentence in their crappy article gave me this whole creative spurt. But if I can't access the article, then I'm never going to find their crappy line. And two, it's like, then I will never sit there and document my insights that I gleaned from their statement for anybody else to see or hear, because I've given up, because AI can do it faster and better and everybody else is doing it. So why bother? So we just end up in this, I'm trying to think of what the right word, in this gene pool, this finite gene pool of material. You know, back in antiquity, if you were a person from the rabbit clan, you could not marry someone from the rabbit clan. You had to marry somebody from the turtle clan or the owl clan, you know, because you were basically keeping your genetic material isolated to this gene pool. But by forcing you to go to a different clan, it spread that genetic material all over the place. And so by utilizing things like AI and stuff like that, it's like we're condensing the gene pool, and it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, so that there really is only one way to think. And that scares the heck out of me, which is why I'm really glad I'm old, because I don't think I will be here or give a crap at that point in time.
Understood. Definitely understood, you know? And you know, I'm right there with you, because it seems as if people are developing a beehive way of thinking, right? Everything has to be a certain way, or it goes against what we believe, and we have to, you know, we have to go out and do all of these different things. But I want to talk about something interesting, though. I
Okay.
want to talk about the energy healing
Okay.
that you do with people, and you know, how what are some of the steps that if someone was to come to you, because you know they're having chronic pain or something like that, what are some of your approaches that you take with helping those individuals pinpoint where these things are coming from, whether it just be, you know, it's something emotional, something that they're carrying, and things like that? What are some of the approaches that you take to help people pinpoint those different areas?
You know, so when someone comes to me, all right, back up. So I believe that 85 to 90% of all disease, there's some kind of a psycho-spiritual aspect to it. You
Mhm.
know, whether you were seen as invisible as a child, or if you walked around with a limiting belief that says I don't matter, or I'm broken, or whatever that is. And over time, it can fester in your body, depending on where you're holding it, into physical disease. And so when I work with someone, you know, in addition to saying, okay, you know, your liver's broken, you know, you have some bile stones, blah, 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 you know, there's a reason the body created that in the first place. You know, there's some kind of an emotional piece that is always a mental or emotional piece that is always tied to the disease, to the issue that they're experiencing. And in my belief system, you know, I can give you supplements, I can send you to different people, but unless you untangle the psychospiritual parts that are tied to it, it'll push it into the background, but it won't make it go away. You know, I've worked with, sadly, some people who have had cancer, and you know, and it turns up because I'm working on them, and I'm like, oh well, you know, you have this issue over here, and they're like, I'll talk about like their gallbladder, and they're like, oh no, I had that removed. But the emotional energy is still trapped in that place. And, you know, so they might have had cancer in their gallbladder and they had that removed. And, you know, sometimes it's a one and done, you know, like you've learned the lesson. But there are a lot of people that they have it removed and then it just migrates to somewhere else, you know, and I'll just look at them and go, you know, you kind of got cancer in your blood because you haven't resolved the issue that created it in the first place.
Right. Well, that makes a lot of sense, because it goes back to something that I learned a while ago, as well as I was going through my own healing journey. The body keeps score, right?
Mm-hmm.
The body, your body will let you know when things have not been resolved, and will actually point you in the right direction if you're paying attention to it, right? Because I've seen people in debilitating pain, and they have 1,000 trips to the doctor, and the doctor's constantly like, "Well, we don't know what to tell you, et cetera, you know, this, that, another." And I have to sit down with them and go, what was the last time that you've gone through something, right? And what I mean by that, and I'm very specific, like any sort of trauma, you know, mental health challenges, or any sort of losses that you're experiencing, any sort of abuse that you're experiencing. And what I find is that once you have the conversation, you really understand that it's a lot deeper than just, you know, than just this. And then we can begin to peel back the layers on it,
Mm-hmm.
and get down to the nitty gritty. Like, you know, and I'm thinking you understand a lot more than me when it comes down to when you see that energy, you're like, hold on, that energy is off right there. That's what's throwing you off. And you're able to go in there and see that and go, let's sit down. Let's talk about this right here, right? And you kind of walk them through it. You know what I'm saying? And you're there with them, because that can get pretty freaking messy as well, right?
Well, you know, and if somebody is experiencing pain in their body, if they're experiencing any kind of physical anything short of I broke my arm, you know, I got some virus, you know, I cut my finger and now it's infected, you know, but anything like cancer, gallbladder disease, you know, anything like that. What that says to me is that there has been something going on in you, mentally or emotionally, for years and years and years and years, and it finally has festered, and I'm using that word very purposefully. It has finally festered to the surface, trying to get your attention, saying, hey, you know, I've been here for a really long time, and now you have to pay attention to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so when I work with people, I mean, I'll just sit there and go, oh, you know, like, this is me. Okay, so I'm poking around. I mean, literally, I do this. I'm on the phone and I'm like poking around. I'm like, okay, so you're showing me, like, when you were 8 years old, some situation happened and you ended up feeling very betrayed and blah, 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 blah. I mean, I can't sit there and say, you know, like specific, but I can feel the energy and especially how it affected them. You know, only to, you know, now they're crying, only to find out that, like, their parents got divorced, you know, and they felt very guilty about it, and like they were the cause of their parents getting divorced, or, you know, whatever that may have been, you know, for that particular individual, you know, because I'll sit there and say, well, you know, this is because something happened in the past, and they're like, well, 2 weeks ago. It's like, we're not talking 2 weeks ago, you know. I mean, usually it's in our formative years. I have seen it extend into people's 20s and 30s. I mean, it can move more forward, but usually in those individuals, it's because they are or had been in, like, deep-seated, abusive, trauma-based relationships. You know, or they've experienced a lot of loss, like unforeseen circumstances, you know, like the flood that just happened in Texas, and, you know, like 2 kids and 2 grandparents all perished on the same day. I mean, that would be an overwhelming amount of grief and loss for any family to have to deal with, you know. And so I could see that if you're not dealing with it and getting help with it or working through it, that could create some giant traumatic scar in you that could manifest as a disease.
Right.
But usually it's in our formative years where we come up with a belief, you know, and that will trigger what's going on inside of us that remains constant. And every time someone pushes that button, every time they make you feel stupid, every time they make you feel incompetent, it's always pushing that, you know, I'm not worthy button, and then by the time you're, 35, 40, 50, 60 years old, it's, think about how many times that button got pushed and irritated and aggravated. And then you're at a job and you get fired and you're fired and it pushes that button because, and so that just adds like a different layer of trauma on top of the trauma that was already there.
Yeah. That can get pretty messy as well, because then you have to peel back all of those different things, and again, to get down to the root cause of why we do certain things. And when I say this, I'm going to use myself as an example. When I started this journey and wanted to understand what true healing was, it took me down a rabbit hole, right? And what it ended up doing was that it made me hold myself accountable. It taught me to have grace and patience for myself, but most importantly, forgiveness as well, right? And it started off with one question: why am I the way that I am? And from there, it showed me how much I had packed on top of everything. And the hardest part is going, well, this is mine. This is not mine. Because what I find that people do, Dr. Rita, is that we end up taking on characteristics and sometimes other people's traumas and making it as our own, depending on the relationship that we have with people. And it was something that I was speaking about with someone else, and I was telling them, I was going, what if half the majority of stuff that people are experiencing is because of the soul connection that they have with other people? And I started thinking, is this a possibility? That we're able to do these things, and if so, what would we call that? Would it be like, soul trauma or soul grief or something like? I think it's something interesting to be, to dive into a little bit more, and I'll really, really talk about it. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that that's true. Everybody goes through their own stuff, and it is all personalized and individual, so you were sitting here sharing like you needed to move everybody else's stuff out of your space so that you could begin the healing process. And so for me, and I'm just being honest, so again, professional life looks great. Personal life, not so clean. And I lived the bulk of my life with two major negative core beliefs: that I was broken and that I didn't matter. And so I spent a lot of my adult life sitting there trying to fix myself. If you saw my collection of self-help books, you would see how much I try to fix myself. But, so I'm trying to not have this come out promotional, but I had written a book, my second to last book, called The Dysfunctional Dance of the Empath and Narcissist. And I wrote that book because I had ended a relationship and came to the realization that he was a narcissist. And when I dug into it, I came to the conclusion that the vast majority of my adult relationships, both personal and romantic, were with narcissists. And I was like, okay, so you need to uncover what this is all about, because you're not going to do it again. You're not going to get
it sounds good.
A relationship. Okay, that didn't work. Even though I wrote a book about it. And so I ended another relationship. He turned out to be narcissistic and toxic as well, which left me befuddled because I thought I had solved all of the mysteries of life, and ended up doing research because I was just not happy. It was like nothing was changing, and came to the realization that nothing was changing because I wasn't really changing myself. And through that research, one of the things that I figured out was I spend all this time trying to fix something versus just being. So I put all my self-help books away, and I stopped reading them, and I stopped trying to fix something. And because it just left me in a less than and unhappy place, so it's like I'm trying to fix something, but I can't move out of this mind space because, it's just reminding me how screwed up I am.
Right. Understood. Definitely understood.
And so I changed the focus, and the focus really became about being mindful and paying attention to what was going on inside. And if I wasn't, and happiness became my number one objective. So if I wasn't happy on the inside, then I needed to stop and evaluate, why am I not happy? Is it because something in me got triggered? And then it's like, okay, well, that's my crap and I need to address it. Or is it because I'm hanging around another toxic person and I'm not happy? And okay, and I just happen to have this here, and this is just here. So I ended up writing this book. Dang, it was me all along.
Understood.
But the process of moving there. So I never write like memoirs, even though in this book I tell a lot of stories, but it's not a memoir. But it really is kind of this journey into what's going on inside and understanding your biology and understanding, like, if I'm in a good mood and I talk to you and my energy goes, it's like, what's going on? I need to pay attention to that, and just really focusing on being calm. We can have great energy when we're home alone. I mean, unless we have attachment issues and we don't do alone very well. But
Right.
We can have great energy, but then when we start interacting with people, the game is different. And navigating that, because we have to deal with people and we have to deal with our own lives and we have to deal with the stupid people at the checkout stand, or utility people or whatever. And it was the most healing thing that I've ever done in my life. And this has just been in the last few years. So I have this whole practice helping people, and I'm very good, but I couldn't help myself.
Deep, right? And I think it happens a lot more. I think it's a lot more common than what people think it is, especially empaths, right? Empaths, introverts. Those seem to be the ones that get hit the most. Right. And being an empath myself, I realize, and an introvert, I realize that when I go out and do things, I have a small window, right? And I have to be careful within that small window because people drain me. And so when I go disappear for a week or two, people are like, man, what's going on? It's like, I got to recharge, man. Y'all don't understand how much of this really takes out of me, right? Because I know what people are here for. They're not here for me. They're here for what I carry, right? And so I'm obligated to give it to them, but I'm not obligated to burn myself out to a point to where I lose the love that I have for the work that I do, right? And I think that's where most people find themselves in really, really tough situations, because we want so much to be of service to people. We want so much to be able to do so much more for other people that we forget the number one star player, which is yourself. Work on you, right? So you can be better. And then you can build up a tolerance for other things, right? You'll develop some tools for yourself and things like that. But that's an interesting concept. And I think it's something that most people need to dive deeper into, especially if you're going to get into this field, because it does take out so much of what you already gone through, and it can be triggering to those things that you're going through,
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Well, and there are so many people that don't recognize the value of loving themselves. You know, as a society, and I'm going to say women in particular, they are brought up being told that you're supposed to take care of everybody else. You know, you grow up, you have a family, you take care of the kids, you cook dinner for your husband, you do the cleaning. You know, you're constantly giving all of your energy away. And you can't, there's not really room for boundaries. You know, no one ever talks about boundaries. No one ever talks about, actually, I'm going to go in a different direction. So I've been reading metaphysical and spiritual books since I was a kid. And one of the things that a lot of, and I'm going to say new aging concepts say that when you're vibrating from your heart center, you know, that you express unconditional love. Okay. And it is inferred that this unconditional love is that you're going to be accepting of whatever people throw at you. And so really that was my goal for a very long time. So you can be crappy to me, you know, you can be whatever, and I would just accept you with unconditional love. But nobody sits there and thinks about what's the detriment of that. What is that doing to you? What is that doing to your health and your psyche and your well-being? You know, because you're giving them permission to not be nice or whatever, but you're inside, you're walking around feeling like crap. And it's like, no. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing I gave up is like, no, I'm choosing not to do that anymore, is to walk around feeling like crap. And if that means that I'm having self-love, and if it means I have to exert a boundary because I'm feeling like crap and that's not acceptable. I gave a presentation at the Lions Club. I live in a little podunk town and they invited me to come speak. And I was like, sure, why not? And I was talking about like the 6 steps to a healthier and happier you. And one of the things was, you know, about doing stuff for fun, you know, and that it was okay to say no. So you have plans to go do something and, you know, a friend calls you up last minute, says, hey, you know, I'm moving. Can you come and help? And I said, you know, do you have the right to say no? Well, you would think I was like an evil person because they all disagreed with what I had to say, all of them. And I was a little bit taken aback because they weren't disagreeing. They were actually kind of hostile to me for suggesting that you honor yourself and have boundaries. You know, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't be there and help people, you know, but every so often you should maybe take yourself into consideration. I mean, especially if you are the giver, the empath, the enabler, you know, the only way to heal and be whole is to put yourself in the forefront. And, you know, because, and I'm saying this very clearly, people that are empaths, people that are helper people will never become a narcissist, ever. Because their guilt won't let them. You know, it's hard enough for them to sit there and say, okay, you know, I'm going to take this $10. I'm going to take this Starbucks that you bought me because I just spent, you know, the last 8 hours moving your house to a different location. And I'm going to feel guilty taking that Starbucks. You know, that's how most of us are.
Yeah.
You know, so if you sit there and honor yourself and love yourself, it can be the hardest thing to do, but it's more balanced and it's more whole and it's taking yourself into consideration, which is not something that people talk about. But unless you take yourself into consideration, then you cannot approach anybody or any situation from a place of wholeness at all.
I can definitely understand that. Definitely understand that. So as we begin to wrap up this episode of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast, Dr. Rita, I only have a couple more questions for you, and I love this conversation. I mean, it could go in these conversations can go in so many different directions, but I want to save some for people for when they reach out to you. So, um, my next question would be, how can people find you?
So my website that Google hates is soulhealer.com. That's soulhealer.com. But I just want to share with people that I have been, because of all the website stuff, doing a lot of posting on Substack. So articles and videos and all kinds of stuff. And my name thing on Substack is Dr. Rita Louise. So all one word, Dr. Rita Louise on Substack. So that's another way to keep in touch with me and to see really my newer content, because all the new content is going on Substack and not on my webpage.
Okay. And my next question to you would be, if Dr. Rita had a superpower, what would it be?
Well, okay, so I have kind of a two-part piece for that. All right, so I'm kind of like a superhero Marvel. I'm a Marvel fan, not as much DC, but I'll take DC. And I've always loved the Flash because he could like fly and he turned into flames. So that would be like a totally so cool superpower. But from a more like, if I could impact the world in a healing way, I think, if I, all right, this just came in my head, so I'm going to say it this way, but I'm not really Christian. So, but if I could be like Jesus and touch someone and heal their emotional wounding, because it just, being an empath, you sit there and you talk to people about their stuff, and it's just like, I feel what they feel. And if I could help people let that go, I think that would be the totally coolest superpower in the world.
Love that. I love that. So I only have one more question for you.
Okay.
If you could leave the audience with something, what would you leave them with?
I'm going to go with this because I brought it up, but that you're not broken. You might be wounded, you might be hurt, you might have trauma that's in your past, but you're not broken. And so it doesn't mean that you have to fix it. You need to just say, okay, today is the first day of the rest of my life. What do I need to do next in order to heal? And then the next day, what do I need to do today in order to heal, and move forward in your life that way?
Okay, nice. Oh man, I love this. We definitely have to do this again.
Okay.
Yeah, most definitely, and other things which we'll talk about after the show. For everyone else out there, look, Dr. Rita's information is in the YouTube channel. If you have not already, do me a favor, subscribe to the channels. Let's support it. Let's get more out there. And let's keep spreading these conversations around to help more and more people. And if you know someone who could benefit from the conversations that we have, do me a favor, share us along with them, okay? And with that being said, Dr. Rita, thank you for being on the show today. Everyone else, thank you for your support, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all the people. I see you guys out there just sitting back, relaxing, and enjoying the conversation. Thank you guys for always tuning in, always supporting the channel. And as always, I am Tony Lynch. This is going to wrap up this episode of Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. You guys already know how we do it. We do a show every day. So, tune in tomorrow. And as always, if you're out there with someone, making sure that you're making memories with them, because tomorrow's not promised to us, okay? And I love you, and enjoy the rest of your day.